Ever wanted to learn about cancelled games in the Legend of Zelda series? Find out in every cancelled Zelda game. Game Facts Special. We've got info on 2 cancelled Wind Waker sequels, a terrifying Tingle horror game, and a bunch of cancelled spin-off titles. If you're looking for your cancelled Zelda fix, then we've got you covered in this episode. Wind Waker sequel for Game Boy Advance. To start us off, we were almost graced with a Wind Waker remake for the Game Boy Advance. 2 talented Ubisoft developers, David Soliani, who was working as a game designer at the time, and game artist Fabio Pagetti, both designed a working prototype of Wind Waker to pitch to Nintendo. A tweet by Soliani details that the videos of the demo were completed and ready to be pitched in 2003, but while ambitious, the pair's plans were halted by their managing director. Although the GBA Wind Waker never came to fruition, fans were treated to some of the concept art that was made. David Soliani went on to direct Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle. The Wind Waker 2. Another Wind Waker project, this time coming from Nintendo itself. At the Game Developers Conference in 2004, the project manager of the Zelda series, Eiji Aonuma, included in his presentation a tease for a new mainline Zelda game, with an expected release date and a promise of more information to be expected at that year's E3 Expo. Not much was leaked about the cancelled sequel, but it was said to have taken place on land with extensive horseback exploration and combat. During E3 2004, fans were treated to a realistic trailer, with visuals far from those seen in the original Wind Waker. Eventually, this game would be titled Twilight Princess, and a proper console sequel to Wind Waker never materialized. Unfortunately, sales figures were not as high as the team hoped for the original Wind Waker, with Nintendo of America telling the Zelda team that the cartoonish look alienated older players and led to low sales in America. In many ways, Twilight Princess carries the legacy of the Wind Waker 2 project. It also takes place on land and features extensive horseback riding and horse-based combat. It's easy to see how the company transformed Wind Waker 2 into Twilight Princess. Four Swords DS. After the popularity of the previous Four Swords titles, the Nintendo DS was bound to get one, with its wireless connection allowing for multiplayer. Game designers Hiromasa Shikata and Shiro Mouri were pushing hard to get a multiplayer title for the DS. However, these efforts were stifled by Shigeru Miyamoto, as he said that the ideas, quote, felt too stale, perhaps feeling that the games had been done, wanting to move on to more original projects. They eventually made their multiplayer debut with Triforce Heroes on the 3DS, which offered a totally new take on multiplayer Zelda. Retro's Sheik spinoff. Did you know that Retro Studios almost made a game solely about the Sheikah tribe? Said to be a much darker iteration in the series, the game was to be based on the last male Sheik after the bad ending concluded in Ocarina of Time. What remains are some stunning pieces of concept art from artist Sammy Hall's now deleted ArtStation. With themes of ethnic cleansing and genocide, it certainly would have expanded upon a darker side in the Zelda lore. The concept did not get very far in development and was cancelled around the time many of Retro's leaders left the company in 2006. Twilight Princess Side Story. Twilight Princess was a staggering success, and it was a no-brainer for the team to begin development on a sequel. For reference, it sold almost 15,000 copies during its first 2 days of release in Japan, and 240,000 copies in its opening weekend in Europe. It had critics gushing over the title in reviews, and after 9 million copies in worldwide sales, it definitely warranted another story with this iteration of Link. Development on such a game was originally to be similar to what Majora's Mask was to Ocarina of Time. To many fans' disappointment, it was canned by Miyamoto early on, who began to complain that the scope of the game ended up becoming too wide. In the end, the game was replaced by Link's Crossbow Training, which utilized the Wii's Zapper peripheral. A sequel to Link's Crossbow Training. Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma was so keen on the idea of utilizing the Wii Zapper peripheral that he wanted to make another game based around this mechanic, this time in multiplayer. It would have been a first-person shooter or FPS, with a much stronger emphasis on multiplayer gameplay using the Wii's built-in Wi-Fi. Eventually, the game was rejected by Nintendo executives. Third Oracle Game Boy Color game. The duo of the Oracle games on the Game Boy Color were originally intended as a trilogy, reflecting the 3 sections of the Triforce: Power, Wisdom, and Courage. During planning, the developers found it difficult to link all 3 games using the password system. This led to the cancellation of the 3rd game, due to be titled Mystical Seed of Courage, and subsequently renamed the Oracle games to what we know them to be today. Information is limited, but it would have involved the Oracle Furore, who was featured in both games. The Adventure of Link SNES Remake. The Nintendo GigaLeak gave fans a plethora of tidbits for unreleased games and information about their productions. This included sprites for what could have been a remake that was planned on the SNES for The Adventure of Link, the 2nd game in the series. The sprites are characteristic of the SNES. There were also 3D models designed to work with the FX chip for the SNES. These models were confirmed to be from a potential Zelda 2 remake. Eventually, the Zelda 2 remake was cancelled, but it did inform the development of Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. Zelda. This game was planned as an additional content patch for a new piece of Nintendo hardware named the Nintendo 64 Dynamic Drive, or Disk Drive, which would have held an additional disc, expanding the memory of the Nintendo 64 and altering the Ocarina of Time. The cartridge would have added new dungeons, altered existing ones, and even included new enemies. Zelda is likely to have eventually been ported onto a bonus disc included with Wind Waker. This bonus was called the Master Quest, but likely didn't include the full scope of the original expansion and didn't include any new enemies. Because of Nintendo GigaLeak, we have even more information about the development of Ocarina of Time, which included some work for Zelda. You can see even more of that in our Zelda GigaLeak episode. Zelda 3 Alternative. While not exactly cancelled, we know that Zelda 3 could have turned out very differently. Concept art from the planning stage of the 3rd Zelda game shows Zelda in a futuristic style of armor, showing that a sci-fi Zelda game could have been a reality. The game would have had a futuristic backdrop and taken a different design by having a hub world and a multi-world structure with time-traveling elements in its gameplay and story, not dissimilar to the later Crash Bandicoot games. Early on, Miyamoto wanted the game to have a Final Fantasy-like party structure with a magic user and a fairy character. The game might have ended up more open-ended, like the original Legend of Zelda, with multiple ways to complete the game. Heroes of Hyrule. This spin-off was going to be similar to Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem, but set in the Zelda universe. It would have featured Goron, Zora, and Rito as playable heroes, set 100 years in the past. It would have also featured a boy in the present named Corey, who was also playable. And the game would have involved our band of heroes adventuring to save Link from Ganon. Being developed by Retro Studios, the game had been fairly fleshed out in terms of narrative, but ended up being cancelled in the concept design phase. In an interview with one of the Retro Studio developers, we found out that the main game mechanics would involve exploration and puzzle solving. The existence of this game was revealed through the YouTube channel Did You Know Gaming. Unfortunately, that video is no longer available, as it was taken down by Nintendo's copyright ninjas allegedly. 3D Classics: The Legend of Zelda. This remake was teased at E3 in 2010 as part of Nintendo's 3D Classics line by Shigeru Miyamoto. Unfortunately, even with excitement from fans, it never came out. Tingle Horror Game. Japanese development studio Vanpool is best known to have developed Raiten Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love and freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land with the Majora's Mask's Tingle character. They were also developing a horror game with the jovial and, let's face it, incredibly creepy guy. Nintendo producer Kensuke Tanabe dropped casually in an interview that the studio they had worked with on other games were developing a Tingle horror game, but mentioned that they eventually cancelled it for more than a few reasons. A rolling game starring a Goron. Vanpool weren't just working on Tingle's debut horror experience, but also a rolling game for the Nintendo DS. Its gameplay would be similar to the Goron minigame from Majora's Mask, but it would utilize the touchscreen of the DS. Nintendo eventually rejected their pitch for this game, but the concept helped Nintendo develop their touchscreen rolling mechanic for a new IP called Dylan's Rolling Western. We could have also mentioned the Zelda tech demos for GameCube or Wii U that never became games. But we're saving those for an episode on tech demos that never became games. Which of these cancelled Zelda games do you want to play the most? Let us know in the comments below! Make sure to check out our episodes on Zelda GigaLeak finds and every cancelled Dragon Ball game! This is McGen signing off. Thanks for watching! This has been a GameFAQs special.